Hello fight fans, thanks for joining us at MMA Insider. Before we get rolling with today's news, show some love by hitting that like button and subscribing. Now let's uncover the latest happenings in MMA. Starting off, Belal Muhammad explains how Khabib Nurmagomedov changed the game moving on. Dustin Poirier shoots down Dan Hooker's recent call for a UFC rematch. Next, Schaub pitches Conor McGregor versus Paddy Pimblett for the Irishman's return. Moving on, Chael Sonnen calls Jorge Masvidal thirsty after recent Leon Edwards callout. Next, Dustin hints at desired UFC return opponent in one-word tweet. Lastly, Conor McGregor blasted by Michael Bisping and Anthony Smith for behavior during Anthony Joshua versus Daniel Dubois fight. UFC welterweight champion Belal Muhammad has revealed how Khabib Nurmagomedov changed the game. As we know, Khabib Nurmagomedov retired from mixed martial arts with an incredible 29-0 record. He walked away as the undisputed UFC lightweight champion, with many believing he belongs in the greatest of all time conversation. Since then, his friends and training partners Islam Makhachev and Belal Muhammad have also captured gold. Belal was the most recent to become champion, defeating Leon Edwards in comprehensive fashion this summer to become the new welterweight king. In a recent interview, Muhammad spoke candidly about how Khabib was a true game changer. Here is what he said. I think for Khabib, it was just different because he was the first Muslim champion. He opened the roads for the rest of us. It wasn't expected, especially with him, because he was bringing the religion into the fight game. It never was like that. Now, people understand what the religion is. When you have him on the mic saying be good to your parents, when you have them speaking about the religion more so than himself, a different champion, a humble champion, where he's not going out flashing cars, clothes, this, and that. For him now, it set the standard of what a Muslim champion is. He was the first. Now you have Islam, now you have me, so now it's kind of more expected. UFC star Dustin feels former opponent Dan Hooker's recent calls for a rematch inside the octagon aren't genuine. Dustin hinted at retirement following a loss to UFC lightweight champion Islam Makhachev at UFC 302 in June. But after contemplating his combat sports future, he envisions at least one more fight in the octagon before calling it quits. Dustin has entertained multiple high-profile names for his send-off fight, including a potential trilogy against Justin Gaethje. He and Gaethje fought for the then-vacant BMF belt at UFC 291 last year. Another potential name in the mix is Hooker, who lost to Dustin by unanimous decision in June 2020. Despite being 4 years removed from their first fight, Hooker appeared to offer his services as Dustin's next potential opponent. In a recent tweet, Dustin appeared to decline Hooker's rematch request. You don't really want that Dan Hooker is fresh off an impressive win over Gamrot at UFC 305 by split decision. He's won 3 fights in a row since back-to-back losses to Makhachev and Arnold Allen. Dustin remains focused on at least one more UFC fight before formally retiring from the sport. Despite his intentions to retire soon, he remains one of the top pay-per-view draws in mixed martial arts. Hooker has been on the cusp of a lightweight title shot on numerous occasions in his career, but he's struggled against the top of the division. But his victory over Gamrot might have pointed to a new future outcome. Former UFC heavyweight Schaub believes Conor McGregor versus Paddy Pimblett makes sense. Conor McGregor is currently without an opponent for his long-awaited UFC return. While Conor McGregor was set to face Michael Chandler earlier this year, he was forced out due to injury. Conor McGregor called to face Michael Chandler in December, but the former Bellator star had other plans. Instead, he signed a deal to face Charles Oliveira in November. Following the booking, Conor McGregor called to return to the cage in 2025. As of now, the Irishman is still expected to face Chandler, but that's far from confirmed. If it's left up to former UFC heavyweight Schaub, the company should call an audible. Instead, McGregor should face rising lightweight Paddy Pimblett. On a recent edition of his podcast, Schaub discussed the Irishman's return. There, the former stand-up comedian argued Conor McGregor versus Paddy Pimblett makes a lot of sense. Given how long the Irishman has been out, Schaub believes Conor McGregor should probably fight someone lower ranked than Chandler. For his part, Paddy Pimblett hasn't competed since his first-round submission win over Bobby Green in July. That stoppage win over King at UFC 304 was his biggest to date, and he's hoping to return to the cage next year. With that in mind, Schaub believes Paddy Pimblett could serve as a perfect foe for Conor McGregor. Here is what he said. Let's say he's back mid-summer, like Q2, early Q3. Let's say Paddy Pimblett gets one more big win. Bobby Green was ranked in the top 15. Let's say he gets one more marquee win. Paddy Pimblett versus Conor, you wouldn't watch that? It puts Paddy on, and it's a good fight. Conor has a significant advantage in striking. On the ground, it's Paddy. That'd be a fun fight. Paddy's a huge name, man, huge name, especially internationally. He's a massive star. It makes sense. You do that, or Max Holloway for Conor, that's what I'd do. Chael Sonnen is at it again with his jabs toward Jorge Masvidal after the former BMF champion's recent call-out for a possible UFC return. Masvidal wants to re-sign with the UFC after retiring from the promotion last year following UFC 287. In what many anticipated was his UFC swan song, he lost to Gilbert Burns by unanimous decision. Masvidal, after a professional boxing loss to Nate Diaz earlier this year, has turned his attention to MMA. He wants to return to the UFC and called out Leon Edwards as an ideal next opponent. Sonnen, who has had his fair share of bad blood with Masvidal, feels the former UFC star is looking desperate with his Edwards call-out. Here is what he said. Masvidal has looked very thirsty as of late, and this is always a tough spot. If he's calling out guys like Leon, that guy is a badass, and that is what Jorge Masvidal is. And now, that fight wouldn't make a lot of sense. That fight isn't taking you anywhere. Not taking you to a title fight, and it's not a title fight. That's the whole reason we couldn't do it before. All of the things that got in the way, once upon a time, now here we are. I don't predict that the UFC is going to make that fight, in fact, quite the opposite. I don't predict for you anybody at the age of 40 is going to get signed to the Ultimate Fighting Championship, including if it's a re-signing. Former UFC interim lightweight champion Dustin Poirier provided a glimpse into who he prefers to fight for his potential career-ending bout inside the octagon. Dustin hasn't fought since a fifth-round submission loss to UFC lightweight champion Islam Makhachev at UFC 302. Immediately after his third lineal title loss, Poirier hinted at retirement in his post-fight interview with Joe Rogan. In the weeks after UFC 302, Dustin appeared to pivot on that sentiment. While a return date isn't formally in the works for Dustin, he's announced he foresees at least one more fight before hanging up the gloves. After losing to Justin Gaethje for the then-vacant BMF belt at UFC 291, Dustin has hinted at a trilogy with his two-time foe. He appeared to further ramp up talks of making the fight happen in a recent social media post. While Gaethje versus Dustin wouldn't be for the BMF title, it would be a high-stakes trilogy capable of headlining a UFC pay-per-view. UFC 310 in December doesn't have a main event announced booked for the card. Gaethje lost the BMF belt to Max Holloway earlier this year at UFC 300. He announced a long hiatus after the brutal knockout loss to recover and heal from the fight. Gaethje's return timeline remains uncertain, but Dustin is in the mix as a potential opponent. The UFC could potentially book their trilogy for an upcoming pay-per-view card. Michael Bisping and Anthony Smith weren't exactly enamored with the antics of Conor McGregor during the Daniel Dubois versus Anthony Joshua event. McGregor was in attendance for the International Boxing Federation heavyweight title fight. As one would expect, Conor was as flamboyant as ever. McGregor even had an unlit cigar throughout the fight. Bisping and Smith observed McGregor's presence and shared their unfavorable opinions on the former two-division UFC champion. During the latest episode of the Believe You Me podcast, Michael Bisping tore into Conor McGregor for the way he was acting during the Anthony Joshua versus Daniel Dubois fight. Here is what he said. Conor, you would have thought that he was a big Daniel Dubois fan because when Joshua was getting those punches, he was out of his seat. Maybe the cigar might have even got lit. Walking in with a big cigar, unlit, between the teeth. How do we feel about that? Because two words spring to mind right now. Douche bag. Smith believes McGregor shares similarities with other popular figures who act a certain way to brag about their wealth. I don't know what happens to people or when you change or how much money you have to start doing weird douchey like that. Like, how rich do you have to be to wear your sunglasses inside 24/7? For what? I wish I was 5% as cool as he thinks he is. Like, how do you get to be so cool? I don't know. I don't get it. And I don't want to just talk Conor, but come on, bro, come on. McGregor has been seen just about everywhere except the octagon for the past 3 years. He was scheduled to fight Michael Chandler back in June, but an injury derailed that plan. Many remain skeptical of McGregor ever competing in MMA again. Thank you so much for tuning into today's video. Your dedication and support fuel our passion to bring you the latest and greatest in the MMA world. If you enjoyed today's news, please give us a thumbs up and share it with fellow MMA fans. Remember to subscribe to stay in the loop with daily MMA updates. We've got a lot of exciting news, interviews, and analysis coming your way every single day. Your engagement helps us grow and serve the MMA community even better. Once again, thank you for being an integral part of our daily MMA journey.